Okay. Okay. So my name is Liz Yetter. I'm the Eastern Indiana Regional Specialist for State of Indiana Cooperative Invasive Management, or SICM, working on the Indiana Invasives Initiative. Welcome to this great presentation, and we'll learn a little bit more about SICM later in the presentation, and we'll have Dawn introduce herself next.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us. We are going to jump in, and Liz is going to kick us off with spring invasive plants, and then I'm going to talk about how to create a plan itself for your property, because that is key. And I do have a background in botany and ecology, as well as biology, with more years than I care to even share doing land management. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz. I'll put myself on mute, and you can take it away.
So here we go, guys. So I picked out a few invasives that are coming up this spring. Some are blooming now, some are probably on the verge of blooming. And I think most of them you'll recognize, one might be newer, and we're going to go over some native lookalikes as well. And you will get all of these slides when the recording comes out. You'll get a copy of these slides as a PDF as well. So here we go. It won't let me advance my slides. That could be an issue. Okay, so first, always good to start with some definitions so we're all on the same page. So a native species. So this is a plant or animal that's growing in its native range where it has complex and essential relationships with other organisms that allow it in its environment that allow it and other organisms to live and reproduce successfully. So essentially these plants, they live really well together, they work together, they have relationships with each other, and they're supposed to be here. They provide essential services to our wildlife, our birds, our bees, our butterflies. We've got a nice butterfly here on the purple coneflower. We've got our native tulip tree, as well as pawpaw, which pawpaw is a native. It can be an aggressive native and be weedy, especially if you're managing your forest for, say, timber, but it is a native plant and does provide some great resources for wildlife. And then, so an invasive species, so to be an invasive species, they have to be non-native. They have to cause harm to either human health, the environment, or the economy. A lot of times they end up causing harm to all three of those categories. And so some that are blooming right now, we've got our calorie pear flower. I'm sure everyone's started to see that come out. So our first one that gets a lot of attention this time of year is garlic mustard. I'm not sure where everyone is in the state, but I've noticed I'm over in Richmond on the eastern side of the state. The garlic mustard hasn't really bolted yet. It hasn't put on that height yet. So we're still at this rosette phase down here. These kidney-shaped leaves, they're kind of round or scalloped edge. They look like lily pads, or sometimes they have a heart shape. We haven't put on any of this height here that you see where you get these triangle-shaped leaves. But I imagine pretty soon with this warm up, we'll be seeing that. They also will produce a small flower, this white flower here, 4 petals. And when you crush it, it smells like garlic. So if you're never not sure, or even if you're just standing in it, it can give off this intense garlic smell. So these plants produce these seed pods, as you can see down in this photo. The lower left, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. And each of these seed pods, or each of these plants, can produce thousands of seeds that then stay in the seed bank. And one of 2 big issues with garlic mustard is, one, it changes the soil. It messes with the fungal properties of the soil. So you're changing your soil composition. So it decreases native plant establishment, but it also directly impacts the reproduction of the Virginia white butterfly. It grows, this butterfly, it lays its eggs on our native mustards, which these bully out of the habitat. and it prevents the eggs from being able to form into caterpillars. So it directly impacts that species along with others. And this plant will grow on ditches, woodside edges. It'll grow in the woods if patches of light. And it forms, as you can see here, these thick colonies. And this is one really easy to pull, especially this time of year. And pulling should be done before these seed pods form. Because once these seed pods start to form, even after you pull a plant out, there's still enough energy left in its little taproot to continue these seed pods to maturity. Another one this time of year that usually grows in similar habitats as the garlic mustard, but more likely on the edge, is Dame's rocket. This is what it's looking like right now, these kind of patches of green, long oval-shaped leaves close to the ground. It then will bolt, just like garlic mustard does, so it puts on that second-year growth, and it forms these pink flowers. These pink flowers have 4 petals. They can be anywhere from pink to white to purple, but typically pink. Plants get about 4 feet tall, and again, easily pulled, but this one has a native look-alike. It looks very similar to our native phlox, which we'll see on the next slide, but a good way to remember is Dame's rocket. Dame has 4 letters. Dame's rocket has 4 petals, whereas our native phlox, as we'll see here, they all have 5 petals and is oppositely leafed, whereas the Dame's rocket is 4 petals and is alternatively leafed. So when I say something that is opposite leaves, it means the leaves are directly across from each other on the stem or on the branching, and alternate means that they are kind of zigzagged from each other. They're not going to be directly across. And now for lesser Cylindine, which is not a new invasive, but it's one that's gotten less attention over the years, but we're seeing it spreading more and more. So lesser Cylindine, it's also called fig buttercup. So it's a short herbaceous perennial. It's originally native to Europe. It really likes wet areas. It does very well in a floodplain or in low-lying wet areas. It is flowering now in places, or if not, it will be flowering soon. It's got these dark green leaves. Again, they're kidney-shaped, kind of scalloped edges. You can see down here a little bit better. They have 8 petals on this bright yellow flower on top. And then this one is one, it spreads via bulbs and tubers. So if you dig it up, the roots will have these little bulb-like appendages on them, and that's how they spread. And in this next photo, so this is a floodplain. This photo was taken in Union County, so Indiana. So this is a floodplain, and it's just this dense mat of mostly lesser Cylindine. So if you have a small patch of it, take care of it sooner rather than later. It's much easier to manage at a small level. But this one does have some both native and non-native lookalikes. We're going to treatment first. Sorry, guys. So for treatment, small infestations can be pulled or dug up. You have to make sure you get those bulbets and tubers out, and the material, it's recommended to bag and remove the material from site. Chemical control, we're a little late to do chemical control at this point in the season, but again, it's dependent on the flowering. So you can use an herbicide treatment in a patch and it will be effective as long as 50% or less of the flowers have emerged. Once the flowers have emerged, chemical isn't as effective. And it will take a while for you to see that effect, but you're going to use a very low rate, 1 to 1.5% of a glyphosate-based product that's been labeled for aquatic use, because like we said, a lot of this plant likes to grow in wet areas. And doing it in February or March also helps prevent off-target damage to not only native spring ephemerals, which we love to see in the woods, but also anything else that might be living in these wet areas that's starting to come about or hasn't quite woken up yet. So, but that aquatic use is essential for this one. So has a few lookalikes. The first one, which is a native plant, which we want to see and keep, is the Marsh Marigold. So this is just a great chart comparing the two. So the native, it's going to have 5 to 9 yellow sepals in the flower. You can see here. The leaves are, and it blooms a little later, April to June. The leaves are still that kidney shaped, but they are going to have very narrow teeth or serrations on them. And some of it is flowering now. I've seen it here. I'm in Richmond, so in the eastern part of the state, and I know it's flowering down in the more southern part of the state. And then it has more of a traditional root like you're used to seeing. It doesn't have the tubers or the bulbets on the stem if you were to pull it out. So here's a good comparison of them side by side. So you've got the leaf here, it's got that kidney shape, but you can see it's a more uniform, smaller teeth around the edge, as opposed to the lesser Cylindine, which has more of a wave, a larger tooth around it. Here you've got the bulbets, the shorter root, as opposed to like the long fibrous root here. And then, excuse me, the difference in the flowers. So it's a good comparison because these two grow in the same area. They like to occupy kind of those wetter lowland areas. Another one that mostly gets confused with lesser Cylindine due to name. So there's native Cylindine poppy, also known as wood poppy. And again, it has a yellow flower, but as you can see here, it has a lot more height than lesser Cylindine does. And it also has a very toothed leaf and deeply sinus leaf here. So wood poppy or native Cylindine poppy. So it's always good to check when you're talking with people because sometimes those common names get mixed up. And this is another plant, just not a fun fact, but that is affected by like garlic mustard. They occupy the same areas. And this blooms much later in the springtime. And then one last lookalike that has already bloomed in most areas is this non-native winter Asinite. So it hasn't been listed, as far as I know, on any invasive species list here in the United States, but that doesn't mean that it won't become a problem. And if you're managing for wildlife or for healthy forests or any of that, it's always good. The natives are always your better option. So the big thing with this, similar yellow flower, but the leaves here, it's kind of this whorled pattern, and these kind of pairs of two, and the flower sits on top. So it also, in my research, I didn't know this, but it is poisonous and it can make people feel unwell, nausea and vomiting. So another reason not to have it in your yard. But this is one, it blooms a little before lesser Cylindine and our other natives. So one to be on the lookout for as well. And then this next one gets a lot of coverage in the spring. So we wanted to cover it too because it hasn't. I don't think it's quite out yet. At least I haven't seen it. It's probably just starting to green up in at least the east central part of the state. So poison hemlock, so originally native to Europe, it was introduced in the United States as an ornamental. It is part of the carrot family, so it does have similarities to like Queen Anne's lace, which is also part of the carrot family. But this plant, it's toxic to humans and to livestock, and it's very common It really likes the side of roadways, pasture ways, pretty much anywhere that's open and sunny, it will grow. So, and we'll see the leaves better on the next slide, but it's got these fern-like leaves that are pinnately compound and alternate on the stem. The stems are a smooth, round tube, the main part of the stem, and they have these purple splotches on them. That is a good way to distinguish it from some of our other similar species. It gets these big white blooms in the summertime, that they do look similar to Queen Anne's lace, but poison hemlock gets a lot taller and has that wider stem. And then the seeds will form where these flowers are, and they're very small, and they are easily spread by wind, mowing, all of that. So here are the leaves. You can see here that fern-like appearance, or they look like carrot tops. They're and then here's that purple spotting we were talking about, and kind of the jointed stem. So it is a hollow stem. So just some closer ups of that, and then our similar species. So the native marsh hemlock is often mistaken for poison hemlock. Again, why names are important. So it's a smaller plant. It's not going to reach the height, because poison hemlock, I'm sure we've all seen it, towering over our heads in the field, at least my own, because I'm not that tall. But it doesn't have the teeth, and it has a much simpler, it has the leaflets, but they're not as frayed and as fern-like as the poison hemlock leaves. So treatment for this, timing is very key for this one, and should be starting soon. So for small patches, if you catch it early, you can dig the plant up by the root before it flowers or has set seed. You'll have to monitor, because these plants will live, the seed bank is likely there if these plants are coming up, so monitoring the area. When you're using this plant, again, long sleeves, gloves, eye protection, face protection. You don't want this plant to contact your skin. It can be very hazardous to your health. Your other option is a foliar application before the plant has bolted, so before it's put on any height or any sort of stem. So this early spring, when that first rosette is coming out, is when you want to treat these plants. Again, with glyphosate, and you can use a surfactant to help that herbicide stick to the plants. So this is one where timing is key, because once the plant has started to put on any sort of height or growth, or even if you find it and it's already flowered for the year, it's good to note where it is so you can come back next year, but it's not an effective use of time and chemical to try to treat it after it's put on any sort of height, because the plant, it will not kill the plant or stop it from producing seed. It might injure it and slow it down, and it'll look brown and crispy, but that plant has still got some fight left in it. And that's the end of my section, and now I'm gonna turn it over to Dawn here.
All right, thank you, Liz. Those are some key invasives, and they are up. I have been receiving several emails from folks about the basil rosettes of poison hemlock already. So it is a good time now, if you see those basil rosettes, to go ahead and treat that. And again, as Liz made an excellent point, you want to treat it before it bolts, before it produces stem. So not only should you, or we hope that you'll be able to identify some of those species, the invasive species that Liz has identified, as well as many others that are on our terrestrial plant rule, but you also want to be able to make a plan for your property. When we make a plan, we have a tendency to stick to it, even when it requires long-term planning, because all of this does, and Liz has referenced that several times this morning already. So We definitely know, science tells us already, and we have known for years, where the problem is. But we just need a lot of help to really be effective at treating invasives, and that means giving space to our natives so that we can feed our insects, which feed our butterflies and our birds and all of the other plethora that goes with that. So Liz, can you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. So writing a plan, you know, the first thing a lot of people kind of instantly start bemoaning as soon as I say this when I'm with a landowner. And it really is, look at it as something fun. We've kind of made a mess over the past couple of years. We've introduced things that are not part of the life cycle. They're not native, as Liz has mentioned in the definition earlier. So this can be a challenge to all of us. And we're going to accept this challenge, this adventure, and we are going to get control of some of these invasives and let those native plants come back so that our insects, our birds, and all of the other stuff that's connected in that food web have a chance. So we're just going to take this on as a challenge. And I will tell you that we have over 28,000 acres enrolled in this program. That's over 550 people that have taken this challenge in Indiana just over the last couple of years. So we hope that you'll join us. So part of your plan is you need to inventory. You need to know what's on your property. You need to identify those invasives. You also kind of need to know your natives and what should your property be? What did it want to be before it was altered? Was it a wetland? Maybe it had, the native plants that Liz was talking about earlier, or was it a forest? Do you live in the sandy soil or do you live in loam soil? All of those things are important. They're part of your inventory. You want to map your property. You want to know where you have what you have. You want to define your goals. We can't do it all at one time. We will become overwhelmed and we will stop. So we want to define our goals. I want to remove the invasives in just the front part of my area. And maybe 10 years down the road, I will start on the back 40 or something like that. So define those goals. Understand your treatment timing. Liz has reiterated this morning. It's very important with specific plants that you don't waste your resources. And then start managing to show others, because that's truly how we're going to make a difference. Your work on your property will go a long way in inspiring someone else to work on theirs, much more so than any top-down administrative rule-making entity will ever do. Next slide. All right, so here's just an example of when we do a landowner survey, and these are free. Liz does them, I do them. We have 5 other regional specialists that do them, and we often will make a map of your property and just kind of help give us a visual of what we're seeing, where we're seeing it, and also let us know of the work ahead. Maps are fun to make. You can do them on Google or there are other types of programs that you can use as well. Next. Thank you, Liz, for doing this for me. So you want to define your goals. So we're going to break down each of those sections that I talked about in that initial slide. Identify and map, and now define your goals. What do you want to do with your property? It's really important. Do you want to create a pollinator habitat in, I don't know, a half an acre of yard space, and that's all you want to do? Maybe you just want to remove all invasives and remove most of your, let's say, mowed lawn and create paths through some native habitat. You need to define those so that we can work around those, so that you can work around those. And again, feel good when you obtain those goals. If you're not inspired, you will quit. And right now, Mother Nature needs us to step up to the plate and be inspired. So define your goals. Do you want to help insects? Do you want to plant for the birds? What do you want to do? Next. Oh, in the picture, let me just show you real quick. In the picture on the right is a sign that says Certified Wildlife Habitat. And I saw this sign in a lot of homes in a neighborhood, and my poor husband was with me, and I about lost my mind because English ivy is actually toxic to grazers and birds. So insects and any other mammalian grazer, they can't eat that. That is not wildlife habitat. Again, we want to make sure that our goals are backed up by science and that we understand. So coming to this program, seeking out some of our free landowner surveys with our experts, and we will absolutely find the experts to help meet your goals, and we will partner with you to do that. The other picture there on the left is a nest. And after we started clearing invasives from our property, perfect, Liz, thank you. That nest we found on our property once we removed the winter creeper that was all over our woods. And that is an ovenbird nest. It took about 4 years, and we were extremely excited. There are actually 3 eggs in that nest. So these are the things that can come about just when you start removing those invasives. Next. All right, so treatment and timing. Liz touched base on this. I've touched base on this. It's extremely important. And we have this calendar of control that's available on our website. All of this is free on the website. Not only can you get a free landowner survey, but you can look up and see, okay, I'm treating a wood species. Happens to be calorie pair. And when should I treat that? Those 2 in a slide are of a calorie pair treatment that went bad. So they cut down the tree and they didn't really get to know their species well. Thank you, Liz, that's perfect. So they cut it down and they decided they weren't going to use a chemical. Calorie pair is very pernicious. We're struggling to find a really good control method for this. We can flood it, we can burn it, that does not kill it. We can cut it at the stump, and if we don't apply a chemical, there are literally over 100 seedlings, sprouts, resprouts from this one stump. So they would create even more biomass as they grow, potentially for more flowers and more seed, and then could spread even further. So a good attempt, a good thought was, I'm going to cut this thing down, but I'm not going to treat it. So you need, in this particular species, it really needs to be treated. Now you can come back and continue to cut this until you really kill the actual root, but it's going to take many, many years. So weigh your resources, understand your plant, and make sure you have the timing of the application spot on and correct to make good use of your time. And the other thing I want to touch base just real quick before we move on is that don't overuse chemicals. The less we use, the better for many things. I had a gentleman that I met with a couple weeks ago, and he was trying to get rid of winter creeper. He was mixing 3 chemicals, full strength, and was not getting effective control. And what he was doing was literally poisoning the soil, but he was just burning the top of the plant. So that small, tiny bits of chemical will soak slowly through all the way to the roots where we want it to go and actually have an effective kill. If we overdo it, we just top kill the plant. The roots are still alive. Voila, we have plants again next year. All right, next slide. And we are almost done. So identify your resources and understand what your capacity is. What are the tools that you have? Do you have help? Do you have a family that will help you? Do you have partners? Are you working on a church and you can get your congregation or a school and maybe you have students? Identify those resources to include your manpower. And then be inspired. Identify your inspiration. What is it? I'm listening. I'm outside today, sitting in my car, but I'm listening to the birds. They are here. We've got we've got pine warblers out here calling, and a couple of others, yellow rump, and that's my inspiration. I know that they come here from a long journey, and they've got to have food. Right now, they need insects, so I've got to make sure my landscape is filled with native plants that will provide insects for these guys to make the rest of their journey. So find your inspiration, identify it. Those 2 species that are there in that's in my landscape, and I just simply removed some native ferns from the woods, brought it into my formal landscape, and then this is a native trillium called Trillium lutea, which is native to Indiana in certain spots. Next slide. Jenny, we will address your concern, Jenny, in just a minute. So kind of just to wrap up, you just want to have fun. And these are photographs of some weed wrangles that a couple of folks have done around the state. There's a family there in the bottom left, and they love to just get out, and they like to pull with their friends and partners. Purple loosestrife, and that's what they have in the bag there. They just make it a family outing. The top picture there is a bunch of us that these folks, they thought they were planting a pollinator garden. They did not address the species that they were planting, nor did they address the invasive calorie pair that lined the entire park. And so we have been diligently trying to kill that calorie pair because it has ruined their pollinator habitat. And they spent about $10,000 on that pollinator habitat. So just get out and have fun. It is certainly hard work. Liz and I both have been field biologists, and we will tell you right off the bat, it's hot, it's sticky, and it's sweaty, but the rewards are absolutely tremendous. And it's truly inspiring to just get with other people and let them inspire you as well. I think that's my last slide, and I do want to address Jenny's comment. Liz, is that the last one? Weed Wrangle, that's just another wonderful event. Those were pictures of people doing weed wrangles. They are a blast. And last year we did over 160 of them in Indiana. We have on the SICM website a list of our weed wrangles. All you got to do is type in www.sicim.info. You can find lots of free information. Sign up for a landowner survey, and you can find out where to participate in a weed wrangle in Indiana. And they are a blast. There might be one more, Liz. So as she gets, so just again, these are just more resources. These are right on our website. There's a pollinator brochure from Purdue. It is amazing. If you want to know what pollinators are attracted to what native plant, that document can be downloaded for free. And you can certainly peruse the Indiana native plant website there that Liz has her cursor on in the bottom. All of that stuff is available on the SICM website. It's www.sicim.info. I'm going to type that in the chat real quick so that you have it. And it's all free. And that, of course, is one of our lovely native birds called a common yellowthroat, that once you get your habitat up to speed, it likes some short shrubby stuff, but that's where it will be. And I got lucky to find that once we did some restoration work. So there's that website. And I will address this question. Jenny says, help decipher statements like apply a 1 to 1.5% rate of a 53.8% ingredient glyphosate. Okay. When you use the calendar of control, we have taken most of the math out of the equation. And all we want you to do when we say you're going to apply a 2% solution, don't worry about that active ingredient percentage. We've already accounted for that. Even though that may vary just a little bit, we've accounted for it. So we want you, let's say, to do a foliar application on bush honeysuckle that is not taller than 6 feet tall. The leaves are all out. We want you to do a 2% mix. So let's say we're going to use glyphosate or rodeo. That would be a trade name. Product name is glyphosate. In a 2% mix, you're going to take 2%, and the rest, 98%, will be water. And we have all of that kind of identified on the website, so those formulas are there as well. If you do a cut stump method, you would use, say, for example, a 20% mix. So you're going to use 20% of a product and 80% water. And you can just measure that out in, we typically say measure it out in a glass container and don't use plastic, but your preference. Did that answer your question? You've got another one about non-ionic surfactant to foliage. On our calendar of control, we list the surfactants that we suggest you use when you mix with a chemical. And that's really important because a lot of plants have a leafy, waxy cuticle, and it's hard for that chemical to penetrate. It doesn't stick to the leaf long enough. The surfactant will allow it to stick to the leaf long enough and then penetrate through that cuticle at a rate that will matter. Most surfactants, like the non-ionic, they are right on the same shelf with your rodeo in the store.